You guys really like it when I drop a book at the beginning of a review to like let you know what it sounds like, you kinky weirdos. So, there you go. That's Holy Sister. Hardcovers are very loud, and that's all that it's available in right now. Okay, I got my book, I got my notes. Let's dive into Holy Sister. Quickie review for Book of the Ancestor as a whole. An absolute masterpiece that I am absolutely going to be adding to my list of series to rant and rave to people consistently. Pick it up. Links down there to order the first, second, and third because, my God, Mark Lawrence, I am so happy I didn't give up after Prince of Thorns. Now let's quickly cover my brief history with Mark Lawrence here because I have people who consistently ask me about it and get it wrong. No, I never hated anything Mark Lawrence wrote. My personal taste did not align with Prince of Thorns. I respected it immensely, but it was so dark and so unrelentingly deep in one character's mind who viewed a world in such a negative way that I just couldn't enjoy it. I had no enjoyment, but I respected what was done there, especially character-wise. I then picked up the first book of Book of the Ancestor, Red Sister, and really liked it. I think I gave it 4 to 5 stars on Goodreads. We'll get into that more in a second. And then I picked up Prince of Fools, taking place in the same world as Prince of Thorns, but a different series. I liked that one a lot, not quite as much as Red Sister, so I decided to continue with Book of the Ancestor. I read Grey Sister, which made me like Red Sister even more. As a sequel, it improved the book before it because of how well it realized and fleshed out what was started in that book. And so already off to a great start for this trilogy here. And now after finishing Holy Sister, I can say definitively that Mark Lawrence is up in the upper echelon of fantasy writers for me. I've had a lot of people complain on the channel recently about me not going deep enough in my reviews because I kind of pulled back after getting a lot of people mad at me for spoilery type things they felt like I didn't give enough warning for. I'm going to try really hard here to strike a nice balance, and I don't think there will be any spoilers at all. But Holy Sister, let's go as deep as I can without ruining anything by starting about the world. If you aren't aware, this isn't a spoiler, it's basic setup for the series. Book of the Ancestor takes place in a world that is dying. It is basically a strip of habitable land encircling this planet with a moon reflecting warmth onto the planet, and this corridor of habitability is shrinking, and that obviously is going to start a lot of conflict in the wider world of the people living in it, and those plots play a major role in the story we're going to get into later here. I just want to establish now that yes, that kind of huge, grand, epic, looming threat here I found to be original. The fact that it's deriving from a natural part of the world really fascinated me and raises the stakes so effectively here. Really, really loved that. And the lore that builds up and the explanation for all the religions and different aspects of this society that grow from this system they're living in, not system, ecosystem. Fascinating, and some of the best subtle world building I've seen in a long time. I didn't appreciate the world for Book of the Ancestor enough until book 3 here, and that's for obvious reasons for anyone who's read it. I need to go back and reread these books eventually just to fully explore and understand everything that happens here and how much the world is affecting the plot and characters in a lot of ways, and just appreciate it because damn, there's a good ending reveal in terms of everything that's happening, the circumstances that I know I saw coming in a couple ways, but having all the full answers, there's some real surprises there. So I loved that. World is remarkable, original. You could have some gripes with it, but I don't think anyone will really hate this aspect of Book of the Ancestor. Continuing on from there, I want to talk about the plot I mentioned on a bit more because it might sound like, oh, this is one of those fantasy books where it's just driven by a larger plot that's either from the big evil bad guy or an environmental factor, and often those stories forget about the smaller character-driven beats of a story that should exist. But no, I found the Book of the Ancestor trilogy and Holy Sister, especially after having 2 books of setup, to have some of the best character-driven plot threads as well, enough to carry a book on their own, and the fact that they are driven into these plot threads that are brought in from a larger ecosystem-driven aspect of this story, and they come to this crescendo together in Holy Sister so well. I am floored. I'm going to need to sit back and process just how well Mark Lawrence didn't feel like he forced anything together, but how well everything naturally came together for this story. It's shocking to say the least. You're gonna hear a lot. I'm gonna run out of positive adjectives for this trilogy, but I really feel like the heart of this story and the elements that are going to hook in the most readers come from the characters specifically. If you've ever heard me talk about a Mark Lawrence book, even the one I gave a mixed review on, Prince of Thorns, I essentially worship this guy's character work because I feel like he is so good at taking in so many factors into account when realizing everyone who's going to influence the story. And their relationships with each other shine so brightly because not only will Mark Lawrence say, hey, this is who this person is, and be very consistent about it, but he'll also think about, here are their motivations, and here's their relationship with these 5 people. And he'll take all these elements into account for every interaction they have. But unlike a lot of fantasy authors who I feel like forget these things in the smaller moments, I never spotted an instance once where I felt like the author forgot every bit of a factor that's going to affect how these characters speak with one another. And this is done to remarkable effect when it comes to power dynamics. The order that Nona is a part of, these assassin nuns, which I've heard some people compare this series to Harry Potter and Hogwarts. I don't get it at all. I kind of understand where you're coming from, but just because there's magic in a school doesn't equate Harry Potter. That's been done before Harry Potter, and it'll be done a lot after. But all right, whatever. And the magic system all playing in there, and the character's exploration of these magic systems. Mark did something there that I genuinely haven't really been forced to think about, but he did it so well I need to bring it up in a review, and that is how a progression through a magic system and someone else's slower progression through learning something, becoming as good at the job they're learning to do, can really affect the relationships in a story. As someone becomes a star and rises while other people struggle or are just average. That's been done before in stories like Harry Potter even, but here it becomes relationship shifting and more realistic. In general, for smaller conflicts between people who are classmates, which are very real things, Mark Lawrence's writing hand is deft enough to make people's responses to minor conflicts very realistic and the escalation of them more human than I think a lot of authors accomplish. For a story's sake, people will often have a character just blow up in response to something because they feel like this is the appropriate proportional response. I didn't see that happening in Book of the Ancestor. I want to take a moment to really appreciate a level of understanding children in drastic situations, going through learning magic systems, going through learning things where they might be excelling at different rates, but not ever forgetting the character or the relationships just to progress plot, and earning consistently why things are happening with these characters and why they're making the choices they make. Now, obviously the transition from here, we need to speak on Nona Gray. I'm going to say probably my favorite new protagonist of 2019 because I started these books this year and I'm finishing a 2019 release with her, and she's going to be the one I remember the most from 2019, hands down. Now, when talking about Nona, there's a lot to dissect. What I'll say in summation before going in a bit deeper is Nona, in terms of progression from where she starts to where she finishes in Holy Sister, might be one of the most well thought out and deep understandings from an author of how a human would handle, at least the character established at the beginning, would handle the situations provided throughout the story I've come across in a long time. Because the character we are presented at the beginning of Book of the Ancestor is a very wide-eyed, optimistic, and honestly somewhat naive protagonist. And she's thrust into a world which I've described is harsh, brutal, and difficult for anyone to live in. And throughout Book of the Ancestor, Nona is taken advantage of. She is put down. And it would have been very easy for Mark Lawrence to just go through a corruption arc or destruction arc with Nona, and maybe her making the ultimate sacrifice at the end, I don't know. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he keeps the core fundamentals of this character. And as she goes through a truly horrific series of events at times, she's just chipped away at. And what you're left with by the end of Holy Sister is a much more adult woman. I wouldn't say a girl anymore, obviously, just because of the progression of time and her maturing. But the structural foundations of what made up her at the beginning are still completely intact. We've just lost a lot of the doughy-eyed optimism, and instead those core fundamentals of loyalty, friendship, things that really are who she is, the things she believes in the most, are almost exposed more viscerally. I just feel like as a reader I understand Nona because of the level of craft given to me here better than 99% of protagonists, because There's so much consistency. There's so much that's well thought out about her. I don't know what the most glowing review I've given out this year is, but it might be Holy Sister, because I am genuinely shocked, floored, flabbergasted, other words, of how much this series paid off. I thought Red Sister was a great foundation, and Grey Sister built off it magnificently. But now that I see this full artwork that was built for me, few things rival it. Thank you, Mark Lawrence, for writing a fantastic book. I kind of went into this year very optimistic for fantasy and was honestly just kind of burnt out about halfway through the year. But this series and a few others I've gotten through have really renewed my hope, my faith in the fantasy genre, and how it's growing, how it's changing. Because right now is an incredibly exciting time. Because right now is such an exciting time for fantasy. It feels like the genre to me is flexing out of a lot of restraints it previously had and growing to new heights. Holy Sister is a prime example of that. This is almost an entirely female-driven story. I mean, there's very few male characters central here because you're following female nun assassins being trained from a young age. I know some people online were commenting about how the guy who wrote Prince of Thorns is going to handle all of this. Like, female characters? No way. Mark Lawrence did such an amazing job with female characters. I know a lot of people out there who read a lot of fantasy, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of times fantasy authors struggle with female characters for some reason. He does not. Well realized, great character, motivation, never over-sexualized or anything like that without just neutering their femininity, which some other fantasy authors are trying to overcompensate do. He strikes the proper balance. So anyone out there who wants to know how to write female characters, do it like this. Write them like human beings. What a shocker. Anyway, Book of the Ancestor for me gets the masterpiece label. I'm throwing it out there. You killed it. Absolutely killed it. And this will be one that I will rant and rave to people about probably till the day I die and recommend a lot. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Check out the links down below if you want to purchase the series I just loved so much. The next review I'm doing will not be nearly so positive, but it'll be one I'm interested to get out there. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.